I don't. My boyfriend is a police officer.
Ma'am, I need you to step back and lower your voice.
No, I'm calling him right now. I'm calling my boyfriend. He's a cop!
Put the phone down and listen to me.
You can't do this to me!
Ma'am, back up. Right now.
Around 6:05 p.m. on December 17, 2024, an officer from the Kenosha Police Department was patrolling a highway when a black 2015 Honda Accord suddenly flew past him at high speeds. The officer immediately activated his emergency lights and siren, but the driver refused to stop. This led to a dangerous high-speed pursuit through the city streets. At one point during the chase, the officer watched in disbelief as the car hit a set of railroad tracks so fast that all four tires lifted off the ground. The woman behind the wheel was reaching speeds of 80 miles per hour in a zone where the limit was only 35 miles per hour. She continued heading eastbound, weaving through traffic and ignoring the flashing blue and red lights behind her as the chase intensified. The high-speed chase finally came to an end when the black car pulled into the parking lot of a local funeral home. Officer Elias Thorne pulled in behind the vehicle, parked his squad car, and stepped out into the cool evening air. As he walked toward the driver's side, he had no idea that the situation was about to become much more difficult than a normal traffic stop. He greeted the driver, Roxy Vane, but she immediately seemed bothered by his presence. Officer Thorne introduced himself and explained exactly why he had pulled her over. He told her about her dangerous driving, mentioning that she was traveling well over 50 miles per hour while crossing railroad tracks and was bouncing between lanes. He also pointed out that she had crossed the double yellow line and drove down the middle of the road. Most importantly, he noted that when he turned on his emergency lights, she chose to speed up and keep going instead of stopping. Roxy sat in her car, looking back at the officer with a blank expression. When he asked if there was any reason for all those dangerous driving choices, she simply replied, "Absolutely not." Even though she claimed she didn't believe she had done those things, the officer could already see that something was wrong. He asked her for her driver's license and insurance, and while she said she had them, her strange behavior made it clear that this was not going to be a simple conversation. Under the bright lights of the funeral home parking lot, the tension began to rise as Roxy prepared to challenge the officer's authority. As Officer Thorne waited for Roxy to find her identification, the situation took a sharp turn toward arrogance. Roxy looked at the officer with wide, defiant eyes and began dropping names, trying to show that she was more important than a typical driver. She leaned back and told him that she didn't really have to listen to him because she was special. With a look of sheer entitlement, she made her first major claim: her boyfriend was a police officer. She seemed to believe that this connection acted like a shield, protecting her from the laws that everyone else had to follow. Instead of cooperating with the simple request for her ID, she reached for her phone, telling Officer Thorne that she was calling her boyfriend right then to handle the situation. Roxy bragged about being friends with so many police officers, using their names as a way to intimidate the young officer standing at her door. She acted as though Officer Thorne was making a huge mistake by treating her like a regular person. The status drop was her first attempt to take control of the night, but it only served to show the officer that she had no intention of being cooperative. Under the bright streetlights, Roxy's sense of being above the law became the main obstacle in what was supposed to be a routine stop. As the officer spoke with Roxy, he began to notice clear signs that she had been drinking. Her eyes were wide, her movements were strange, and a strong smell of alcohol was coming from inside the car. When Officer Thorne asked her how much she had to drink that night, Roxy tried to act like nothing was wrong. She leaned back and calmly told him that she only had probably like 2 glasses of wine. The officer pressed for more details, asking if they were normal-sized glasses. Roxy insisted they were, claiming she had started drinking a couple of hours ago. However, her sense of time seemed completely off. When asked what time it was, she guessed it was around 9 p.m., even though the traffic stop had actually started hours earlier. Despite her calm answers, Roxy's story didn't match her behavior or the way she had been driving 80 miles per hour through the city. Officer Thorne knew that 2 glasses was a common excuse, but the evidence pointed to something much more serious. What started as a simple conversation about a few drinks was quickly turning into a much bigger problem for Roxy as the officer prepared to test her sobriety. The situation moved from a conversation to a confrontation when Officer Thorne asked Roxy to step out of her car. Once she was outside, the officer tried to begin his investigation, but Roxy had no interest in following his orders. She stood by her car with a look of pure defiance, refusing to let the officer look in her purse for her ID. She repeatedly told the officers that she did not trust them. Instead of staying where she was told, Roxy suddenly decided she was finished with the stop. She turned her back on Officer Thorne and began walking away, acting as if she could simply leave the scene whenever she wanted. The officer had to follow her, repeatedly telling her to stop walking away, but she ignored him completely. Her refusal to stay put and her attempt to walk off into the darkness forced the officer to take action. What started as a traffic stop for speeding had now become a scene where Roxy was actively trying to escape the law. Officer Thorne knew he could no longer wait for Roxy to cooperate. As she tried to walk away, he reached out and grabbed her arm, telling her she was officially under arrest. Roxy's attitude changed from being a difficult driver to being completely shocked. She began to whine and complain, telling the officers that they were being so mean just for doing their jobs. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut seemed to set her off even more. As the metal went around her wrists, she started to resist and pull away from the officers. Officer Thorne tried to read her rights, but Roxy refused to listen. She shouted over him, trying to drown out his voice so she could claim later that she didn't hear them. The more the officers tried to get her under control, the louder she became. She moved her body around wildly, making it hard for the officers to walk her to the patrol car. Even though she was in trouble for driving 80 miles per hour while intoxicated, she acted like the police were the ones doing something wrong. By the time they reached the car door, Roxy was no longer just a speeding driver, she was a person actively fighting against the law. As Roxy was led toward the patrol car, her anger turned into a stream of threats directed at the officer's career. She stopped worrying about the traffic stop and started trying to scare Officer Thorne by claiming she had the power to get him fired. She repeatedly shouted that he was going to lose his job because of who she was and who she knew in the police department. Roxy's words became very harsh as she called the officer names and told him he was a terrible police officer. She acted as though her connections made her a boss over the police, and she told the officer he would be sorry for arresting her once her police friends found out. Despite her loud yelling and mean words, Officer Thorne remained calm and professional, which only seemed to make Roxy more upset. She truly believed that by being loud and threatening the officer's badge, she could force him to let her go. The situation was no longer just about driving too fast, it was now a battle where Roxy was using every threat she could think of to avoid the consequences of her actions. While Roxy was safely secured in the back of the patrol car, Officer Thorne began to search her vehicle. He had already noticed a strong smell of alcohol coming from the car during the stop. As he looked through the front seat area, the smell became even more powerful. He told the other officers nearby that the car smelled like straight tequila. It didn't take long to find the source of the odor. Tucked away inside the car was a bottle that confirmed the officers' suspicions. This discovery was the smoking gun that proved Roxy hadn't just had 2 glasses of wine hours ago, as she had claimed. Instead, the evidence showed she had likely been drinking right up until the moment she sped past the police at 80 miles per hour. The presence of the tequila explained why Roxy was acting so strangely and why she had been driving so dangerously. For Officer Thorne, the search was a key part of the investigation. It turned Roxy's excuses into lies and gave the police the physical proof they needed to back up the felony charges she was now facing. While Roxy continued to yell from the back of the squad car, the evidence inside her Honda Accord told the true story of her night. Inside the patrol car, Officer Thorne tried once more to read Roxy her Miranda rights. This is the list of rights that every person must hear when they are arrested. However, Roxy was not in the mood to listen. As soon as the officer started reading, she began to yell over him, calling him names and telling him to stop talking. She shouted that she already knew her rights and didn't need to hear them from him. Even though she was being very loud, the officer stayed patient and tried to finish reading the card. Roxy then claimed that she had never heard her rights at all, even though the officer was reading them right in front of her. She was trying to create a problem by acting like the police were not following the rules. She told the officer he was an asshole and said she would only talk to her lawyer. The Miranda standoff showed just how much Roxy wanted to be difficult. By refusing to acknowledge her rights, she thought she could make the arrest look illegal. But the officer's camera was recording everything, showing that he was doing his job correctly while Roxy continued to scream and throw insults. This was another moment where Roxy's anger made a simple situation much worse for her. As the patrol car began to move, Roxy's behavior took a dark and scary turn. Instead of just being angry, she started to act like she was in great danger. She looked around the back seat with wide, terrified eyes and began to scream that Officer Thorne was going to kill her. Even though the officer was simply driving her to the hospital, Roxy's mind was filled with a deep sense of paranoia. She started to shout that the Kenosha police were known for taking people out to quiet places to hurt them. She asked the officer if he had children of his own and how he would feel if someone treated his daughter the way he was treating her. Roxy kept begging to be let out of the car, crying out that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. Despite the officer's calm voice telling her they were only going to the hospital, Roxy refused to believe him. She worked herself up into such a state of fear that she began to kick and thrash around in the back seat. This was no longer just a woman who was upset about a ticket, she was now convinced that her life was at stake, making the situation much more dangerous for everyone involved. As the patrol car continued toward the hospital, Roxy's fear turned into a dangerous action. Even though she was in handcuffs, she began to move her body violently in the back seat. In a sudden and shocking moment, she leaned forward and slammed her own head into the hard plastic divider that separates the front and back of the police car. She hit the divider with so much force that she briefly knocked herself out. When she woke up a few seconds later, she was bleeding from a gash on her head. Instead of admitting she had hurt herself, Roxy immediately began to scream and lie about what happened. She shouted that the officers had punched her in the face and beat the out of her. She was trying to create a fake scene of police brutality to get out of trouble. Officer Thorne looked back and saw that she was bleeding, but he knew exactly what had happened because the camera in the back of the car had captured everything. Roxy's attempt to frame the officers only made her situation worse, as she now had a physical injury and was facing even more serious charges for lying and resisting. This self-inflicted wound was the biggest moment of tension in the night, showing that Roxy was willing to hurt herself just to make the police look like the bad guys. When the police car finally arrived at the hospital, the situation did not get any better. Roxy was still bleeding from the cut on her head, but she refused to let anyone help her. Officer Thorne had a legal paper called a search warrant, which meant a doctor had to take a small sample of her blood to test for alcohol. Roxy did not care about the rules or the warrant. She began to scream even louder, claiming that the police were lying about how she got hurt. The officers tried to get her out of the car and into a wheelchair so she could be treated safely. Roxy made this very hard by kicking her legs and thrashing her body around. She shouted that she was going to sue the out of the police department and that the officers were ugly pieces of ... Even though she was at a place meant to help people, she acted like she was being attacked. The hospital staff watched in shock as Roxy continued her meltdown. She kept yelling that she was dating a cop and that everyone involved would lose their jobs. It took several people to keep her still enough to follow the court order for the blood test. This hospital chaos showed that Roxy was determined to fight the law until the very end, even when it meant refusing the medical help she clearly needed. As the night dragged on, Roxy's anger turned into deep sadness. While sitting in the hospital, she began to cry and talk about her life, trying to make the officers feel sorry for her. She repeatedly told anyone who would listen, "I'm a good mother and I'm a good person." She acted as if she was the victim of a terrible mistake instead of the person who had led the police on a high-speed chase. Roxy started talking about her family to try and gain sympathy. She mentioned that she had 3 beautiful children and even grandkids who loved her very much. She used this as a reason why the officers should let her go, as if being a mother meant she shouldn't face the consequences for driving 80 miles per hour while intoxicated. She even brought up her dying mother in Arizona, claiming she needed to get home to help her. Despite her tears and stories, her actions earlier in the night told a different story. She had spent hours screaming, fighting, and even trying to frame the officers by hurting herself. This victim complex was her final attempt to wiggle out of trouble. She wanted the officers to see her as a loving parent rather than a dangerous driver, but the evidence of her behavior was too strong to ignore. While she sobbed about being a good person, the reality of her multiple felony charges was waiting for her at the jail. After leaving the hospital, Officer Thorne took Roxy to the county jail for booking. Even though she was exhausted from the long night, she found one last thing to fight about: her purse. When the officer began the process of taking her belongings, Roxy became very protective of her bag. She didn't want the officers to touch it or go through it, claiming that they were only going to steal her stuff. Roxy told the officers that they weren't catching actual criminals and were just picking on her instead. She sat on a bench and argued about every single item the jail staff needed to take. She even asked the officer to put her handcuffs on tighter just to be difficult, even though she had been complaining about being hurt all night. The officer explained that she was being charged with multiple felonies, including battering a police officer. Roxy acted shocked, asking who she had even beaten up, despite her earlier behavior of kicking and fighting. She continued to tell the officers they were doing a bad job and that she would explain everything to a judge in the morning. As she sat in the intake area, the reality of the situation finally started to settle in. She wasn't going home to her children or her boyfriend, she was staying in a jail cell. After the wild night ended, the drama moved from the streets to the courtroom. Roxy Vane faced many serious legal problems because of her choices. She was originally charged with several crimes, including felony battery, threatening an officer, and resisting arrest. These were very serious because she had fought the police and tried to frame them by hurting herself. A few days after her arrest, Roxy was allowed to leave jail after paying a $750 cash bond. As the months went by, her case moved through the legal system. By June 2025, the court reached a final decision. Even though she had caused a worse nightmare for the officers, many of the most serious charges were dropped by the prosecutor. In the end, Roxy was only found guilty of 2 smaller crimes: resisting an officer and disorderly conduct. The judge did not send her back to jail and did not put her on probation. Instead, she was only ordered to pay $200 in fines. It was a small price to pay after a night filled with high-speed chases, screaming, and lies. The story of the drunk mom ended not with a long prison sentence, but with a simple fine and a lesson about the reality of the law.